The last transmission from the Lyrathia cord came in broken pieces. It reached Earth's outer relay buoy at 03:47 station time, a signal so faint that 3 automated systems flagged it as background noise and moved on. The fourth system, an old military-grade receiver built during the Martian colony wars, did not move on. It held the signal, cleaned it, and sent it up the chain. By morning, every senior officer in the United Earth Space Command had read the transcript twice. The signal was not in one language, it was in 41. Someone on the other end had spent real time building a message that could be understood by as many species as possible. Near the bottom of the list, awkward and clearly assembled from intercepted Earth broadcasts, was a rough version of English. It said, "We are the last. We have fought for 60 years. Every ally we asked has refused or fallen. We do not know if you are capable of war. We do not know if you are willing. But you are the only name left on the list. Please, if you hear this, please answer." There was no dramatic moment in the command room. No one stood up and gave a speech. Admiral Renas Salway read the message, set it down on the table, and asked for a full intelligence brief within 2 hours. The brief was not encouraging. The Drathan Imperium had been expanding for over a century. They did not conquer the way old human empires had. They did not want land or resources in the traditional sense. They wanted silence. Worlds that resisted were broken until nothing resisted anymore. Worlds that surrendered early were taxed into dependency. Either way, the result was the same: one more system that would never challenge them again. The Lyrathia Accord had been the only organized resistance left. 12 civilizations pooling their fleets, their science, their soldiers. For 60 years they had held a line, but lines wear down. The Accord's population worlds had been blockaded one by one, supply chains cut, shipyards destroyed. 60 years of war had hollowed them out from the inside, and the Drathan Imperium knew it. The final push had already begun. Of the other civilizations the Accord had contacted, none had answered. The Velnorath had gone dark and sealed their borders. The Sarani Collective had formally surrendered to the Imperium 3 months ago. The Marin hegemony had tried to fight and had 2 of their worlds reduced to ash before they stopped. The intelligence officers noted one more thing, almost as a footnote. The Drathan Imperium had no record of humanity. Earth sat in a quiet arm of the galaxy, never mapped in any Drathan conquest chart. To them, humanity did not exist. The Senate session lasted 11 hours. There were voices that said it was not their war. There were voices that said Earth's fleet was not built for something this large, that they had never fought outside their own solar system, that they would be walking into a war that had already chewed through civilizations far older and more powerful than them. Those voices were not wrong, and Salway listened to every one of them. Then she stood up. She did not use prepared notes. She said that every civilization in that signal had once been where humanity was now, young, uncertain, still learning what they were capable of. She said that the Accord had not asked for a savior. They had asked for someone willing to show up. She said there was a difference between a war you choose and a war that eventually finds you, and that in her experience, the ones who waited for the second kind always regretted not choosing the first. She said, "We heard them. That is already something we cannot take back." The vote was not unanimous, but it passed. Within 72 hours, Earth's unified fleet was being prepared for deep space deployment. Dockworkers pulled double shifts. Supply manifests were rewritten. Pilots who had been on rotation leave were recalled. There was no celebration, no parade. The mood across the fleet was the same quiet that settles over a person who has made a hard decision and is no longer second-guessing it. Captain Dariz Akafar, the fleet's lead contact specialist, spent those 72 hours learning everything the Accord signal contained. Not just the words, but the structure of the languages, the way the message had been layered, the small clues about the minds that had built it. He noticed that the alien who had written the English portion had made one error consistently. They kept using the word willing where a human would say ready. as if the only question they thought worth asking was not whether humanity could fight, but whether humanity still cared enough to try. He thought about that for a long time. The fleet left Earth on a cold Tuesday with no fanfare. Ground crews watched from the docking arms as the ships moved out of orbit one by one, each one carrying people who had left behind families and warm rooms and ordinary lives. The relay buoy that had caught the original signal was the last thing they passed on the way out. Someone had painted 3 words on the buoy's maintenance panel, small enough that you had to be looking for it. It said, "We heard you." Somewhere 60 light-years away, a dying coalition was still waiting to find out if the last name on their list would answer. They did not know that the answer was already on its way. They did not know what was coming. Nobody did, really, not even the humans aboard those ships, not fully. But the ships moved forward anyway, steady and quiet, out into the dark between the stars. The Accord ships did not look like warships anymore. That was the first thing the human fleet noticed when they dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the rally point. The vessels hanging in the dark were patched, repatched, and patched again. Hull plates of 4 different materials held together over the same wounds. Engine housings that had been replaced so many times the original design was barely visible. These were not ships that had been maintained. They were ships that had been kept alive through stubbornness alone, the way a person keeps walking on a broken leg because stopping is worse. There were 41 Accord vessels at the rally point. According to the brief, there had once been over 400. Delegate Vashon came aboard the human flagship UESC Steadfast through the docking collar, and the first thing he did was stop walking. He stood in the corridor and looked around. His species, the Lyrathi, were tall and thin-limbed, with 4 arms and a face that had no visible eyes. They perceived light through the skin of their forehead, which changed color slightly depending on what they were processing emotionally. Right now it was a pale, uncertain gray. He had expected a warship. The corridor around him had a water dispenser, a hand-painted sign reminding personnel to log sleep hours, and someone's child's drawing taped to the wall near the junction, left there, probably, by a crew member who needed something human to look at in the dark. Akafar was the one who met him. He extended a hand, explained the gesture, and waited. Vashon studied the hand for a moment, then placed 2 of his own against it, the Lyrathi greeting for meeting someone you are not yet sure how to read. Akafar nodded like that was exactly right. The briefing that followed lasted 6 hours, and it changed the shape of what humanity thought they were walking into. The Drathan Imperium did not win through superior technology. Their ships were powerful but not remarkable. Their weapons were effective but not innovative. What they had, what had made them unstoppable for over a century, was patience. They planned campaigns across decades. They never overextended. They destroyed supply infrastructure first, always, so that by the time the actual fighting began, the enemy was already starving. They had outlasted 60 years of Accord resistance, not by being stronger, but by being willing to wait until the Accord had nothing left. Vashon's forehead had gone dark through most of this briefing. When Akafar asked him what the color meant, Vashon was quiet for a moment. Then he said it was the color of explaining something to someone who cannot be helped. He said his people used it at funerals. Akafar told him to keep talking. The revelation that hit hardest came near the end. The Drathan Imperium maintained detailed records of every species they had ever encountered, threat assessments, cultural profiles, estimated military capacity. Every civilization the Accord had contacted for help existed in those records. The Imperium knew their weaknesses before the war even started. Humanity had no entry, not a partial file, not a placeholder, nothing. Earth had never crossed a Drathan survey route. No human ship had ever been logged in their systems. To the Drathan Imperium, humanity was not an unknown, it was non-existent. And that meant there was no playbook for fighting them. Commander Petrov Haas, the Steadfast chief engineer, had been sitting in on the technical exchange between human and Accord engineers when this came up. He looked at the translated readout for a long moment, and then said, quietly, that this was actually very good news. When the Accord engineer across from him asked why, Haas pulled up the Imperium's standard engagement models, supplied by Accord Intelligence, and pointed to the predictive algorithms at the center of every Drathan tactical plan. Every model assumed the enemy had limits the Drathan knew about in advance, removed the known limits, and every model broke. The Accord engineers stared at him. Then they asked him to explain further. Haas spent 3 hours explaining further, and by the end the Accord engineers were doing something HFY had not seen from any of them since the fleet arrived. They were taking notes. There were harder moments too. A Lyrathi crew member walked into a human mess hall during a shift meal and stopped cold at the smell of cooked meat and spices, and something sweet from a dessert someone had traded from the supply stores. The smells hit so many wrong registers in the aliens' biology that they had to leave. A human engineer working alongside an Accord team accidentally made a joke, just a small one, about the welding torch, and the Accord team went completely silent because humor about tools being alive did not exist in their culture, and they could not tell if the human was malfunctioning. HFY moved between these moments constantly. He explained. He translated not just words but intentions. He told the Accord crew that humans being loud was not aggression, that humans touching each other's shoulders was comfort, not challenge, that when a human crew member cried in the corridor after getting news from home, the right response was to leave them alone for 10 minutes and then offer food. The Accord crew found this last one deeply confusing, but they wrote it down. On the third day, a Drathan scouting wing passed through the outer edge of the system. Their sensors swept the rally point. The reading came back strange, hull materials unlike anything on file, energy signatures that matched no known civilization profile. The wing commander reviewed it twice, flagged it as likely instrument error, and moved on. No report was filed. Back on the Steadfast, nobody knew this had happened. Haas was in the engine bay, running stress tests on something he was not yet ready to name. HFY was in his quarters, staring at the word willing on his notes and thinking about what it cost a civilization to still ask that question after 60 years. Outside, the dark was quiet. For now, the Drathan battle group arrived at Lyreth Prime expecting a ceremony. Not a literal one, but 60 years of war had given their fleet commanders a certain rhythm, a muscle memory of what the end of a campaign looked like. The enemy fleet broken and scattered. The planet below dark and quiet, its defenses stripped, its population waiting. You move in, you establish orbit, you send down the administration teams. Clean. Final. The Imperium had done it 11 times in the last decade alone. Fleet Commander Sarkov reviewed his approach vectors the way a man reads something he has already memorized. The Accord's remnant navy was in orbit, maybe 30 ships, barely capable of coordinated movement. His group had 200. This was not a battle. This was the last page of a chapter. The human fleet came from a direction that was not on any approach chart. Sarkov noticed the new sensor contacts first as background clutter, odd returns that his targeting systems kept trying to classify and failing. Then 3 of his outer escorts went dark inside of 40 seconds, and the background clutter became very real very fast. The humans did not fight to hold a line. That was the thing that broke Sarkov's tactical mind in the first 10 minutes. Every doctrine the Imperium had refined over a century was built around the idea that a defending force would anchor to something, a planet, a station, a strategic corridor. You identified the anchor, you cut it, the enemy collapsed, but the human ships had no anchor. They moved in ways that made no geometric sense, splitting his attention across 6 vectors simultaneously, striking and pulling back and striking somewhere else before his response could form. They were not defending Lyreth Prime. They were treating his fleet like something to be taken apart from every direction at once. The Accord's remnant ships, meanwhile, did something no Accord fleet had done in years. They pushed forward. The presence of the humans behind Sarkov's formation had forced him to split his attention, and the Accord commander, a veteran named Drentel who had not slept a full night in a decade, drove into the gap like he had nothing left to lose. Because he didn't. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, Sarkov's fleet had retreated, the first Drathan tactical withdrawal recorded in 31 years. He had lost 40 ships. He had expected to lose none. Lyrath Prime was still free, which was not a sentence anyone had expected to say this week. The cost on the human side was not small. 11 ships destroyed. 4 more that would never fight again. Nearly 3,000 people dead in the span of 4 hours, which in human terms was a number large enough to name streets and schools after for generations. The surviving crews did what crews do. They performed damage control, they triaged their wounded, they logged their dead. On the steadfast lower decks, someone had started writing names on the wall of the crew lounge. Just first names. Just so the names were somewhere. Vashin came to find Akafar that evening. He found him sitting in a maintenance corridor near the hull, doing nothing in particular, just sitting. Vashin sat down across from him, the four-limbed folding motion of a Lyrathi settling onto a surface that was not designed for them, and they were both quiet for a while. Then Vashin asked how humans carried it, not the war, the grief. He said his people had a word for the weight that accumulates when you survive something others do not. It translated roughly as the debt of being alive. He said that after 60 years, his whole species walked under that weight, and it had become harder and harder to keep walking. Akafar thought about it. He said that humans did not have a solution to that weight. He said humans carried it badly, actually, that it broke a lot of people, that there were whole support systems built specifically because grief, unmanaged, destroyed individuals and communities. He said humans cried in maintenance corridors sometimes. He gestured to indicate that the maintenance corridor in question was this one. Vashin's forehead shifted through several colors. Then he asked why, if it was so damaging, humans kept choosing to be in situations that caused it. Akafar said he thought it was because the alternative, not showing up, not being there, protecting yourself from the grief by staying home, felt worse than the grief itself. He said humans were not brave because they did not feel fear or pain. They were brave because feeling fear and pain and going anyway had been something his species had practiced for a very long time. Vashin was quiet. Then he said, 60 years ago when the war began, the Accord sent out calls for help to many civilizations. Some were stronger than humanity. Some were older. Some had better ships and bigger fleets. None of them answered. He asked if Akafar knew why humanity had. Akafar said he did not know for certain, but he thought it was because humanity had been the underdog for most of its history, and underdogs did not forget what it felt like to need someone and have nobody come. Vashin sat with that for a long time. His forehead shifted to a color Akafar had not seen before, something warm, something between amber and gold. He asked what that color meant. Vashin said there was no single translation. The closest was something like the feeling of being reminded that the world is not only loss. On the bridge, Admiral Solway was already planning the next move. Not a defense, a push. She had seen Sarkov retreat and she understood what it meant, not victory, but a crack. And cracks, if you hit them right, became something else entirely. She called her captains together and told them they were not going to wait for the Imperium to adapt. They were going in. The Drathan Imperium had a word for the space behind their front lines. It translated, roughly, as the quiet. They used it the way a person might use the word home, not a physical description but a feeling. The territory behind the front was where the war was not. It was where supply ships moved freely, and administration, planets ran their routines, and nobody looked at the sky with anything other than ordinary disinterest. Nobody had ever made the quiet loud before. Solway's strategy did not have an official name. Haas called it kicking the table, which the Accord officers did not understand, and Akafur did not bother translating because the meaning would not survive it. The idea was simple. Do not fight the Drathan Imperium where they expect to be fought. Go around. Go deep. Find every pressure point in the infrastructure that has kept their war machine running for a century and hit it hard enough that the machine has to stop looking outward and start looking inward. The human fleet, with a small Accord escort, moved into Drathan supply space through a corridor no Empire cartographer had ever thought to defend because nothing had ever come through it. It was too far from the front. It required too deep a thrust into territory the Imperium considered permanently safe. No sane military force would attempt it. The first supply hub fell in 11 minutes. It was not defended. Why would it be? It had never needed to be. The workers and administrators inside had their evacuation. The humans secured the facility, and Haas spent 45 minutes crawling through the infrastructure with 2 engineers from the Accord's technical division, figuring out what could be turned, what could be taken, and what could be left as a problem for the Imperium to spend time and resources solving. He found the Imperium's fuel distribution system was run through a single coordination network with a predictable maintenance window every 70 hours. He filed that away. The second and third strikes hit supply lines closer to the Imperium's core systems. Each one followed the same logic: move fast, minimize civilian harm, take what was useful, break what was not. But something unexpected began happening on the fourth strike. When the human ships dropped into orbit around an Accord-occupied world called Vel-Shara, they found people already waiting. Not Drathan soldiers, survivors. Vel-Shara had been under Drathan occupation for 19 years. Its people, a 4-legged species called the Veth, had never stopped resisting, but after 19 years of occupation, their resistance looked like small acts, hidden food, quiet sabotage. They had no weapons. They had no ships. They had kept themselves alive and kept their identity alive, which in 19 years of occupation was itself an extraordinary act. A young Veth named Uru, who had learned Accord standard language from a contraband audio file, came to the docking bay when the human shuttle landed and asked, in careful and slightly wrong grammar, if the newcomers were here to stay or to leave. Akafur said they were here to leave, but that they would not leave without doing something useful first. What followed over the next 30 hours was not in any military plan. Haas and his engineers distributed everything they could spare from their weapon stores to Uru's network of hidden resistance cells. Human medics treated wounds that had been untreated for years. Someone found a functional fabricator in the captured supply hub and spent most of the night printing basic tools and components that the Veth had not been able to source under occupation. One crew member, a young navigation officer named Balo who had grown up in Lagos and had a habit of teaching card games to people he met on shore leave, sat in a Veth family's basement and taught their eldest child how to read Accord standard maps. The Veth had a custom Akafur had not encountered before. When they trusted someone, they showed it by touching their own throat with 2 fingers, the same gesture used to indicate that you were speaking honestly, that your voice carried no hidden meaning. By the time the humans left, nearly every Veth they had met was doing it. Akafur put it in his contact report. He marked it, "Remember this." 3 days later, Vel-Shara's resistance cells cut the Imperium's local communications grid, collapsed 2 garrison supply routes, and disappeared back into the population before the occupation force could respond. It was the largest coordinated resistance action on the planet in 19 years. The occupation commander filed a report describing the incident as internally motivated and requested more garrison troops. The Imperium, already fielding problems in 7 other systems from the human campaign, did not have more troops to send. Grand Strategist Vorek read the full intelligence brief on humanity in his operations chamber on the Imperium's command world. He read it slowly and without expression. By the time he finished, He had been sitting for 6 hours and had not eaten or slept. His aide asked if he wanted anything. Vorik said he wanted to know how long the Imperium had estimated the war with the Accord would take to conclude after the final push. The aide said 3 months at the most. Vorik said how long it had been since the humans arrived. The aide said 47 days. Vorik said, "And how many systems have they disrupted in 47 days?" The aide said 11 confirmed, 4 suspected. Vorik was quiet for a long time. Then he made a decision that he had not made in 30 years of service. He chose a target that was not military. He chose Earth. Not to destroy it, though he would if he had to. He chose it because every species he had ever faced had a breaking point, and every breaking point in his experience was the thing they loved most. Threaten the home, and the warriors at the front become something other than warriors. They become afraid. Afraid soldiers made mistakes. He dispatched a fast strike fleet with orders to reach Earth and make themselves visible. He was certain this would work. Every model he had said so. He had not yet understood that the models were wrong. The message that reached the Steadfast was 230 words long. Accord Intelligence had intercepted a Drathan command transmission and spent 14 hours breaking its encryption before passing it to Akafar in translated form. He read it once, walked to the bridge, and handed it to Solway without saying anything. She read it. Then she read it again. Then she forwarded it to every captain in the fleet with one line attached at the bottom. "They think threatening our home will stop us. Let's make sure they never get close enough to find out." She called her senior staff together and laid out 2 operations at once, something no human fleet had ever attempted across the distances involved. One task group would continue the push toward the cradle, the Drathan Imperium's central command and logistics station, deep in Imperial space. It was the brain of the war machine, not a planet, but a station large enough to house a city, where Grand Strategist Vorik ran his campaigns, and the Imperium's military coordination flowed through like blood through a heart. The second force would go home. Or rather, home's defenders would be told what was coming. Admiral Bryce commanded Earth's home defense fleet, the ships left behind when Solway took the main force out. They were older ships, fewer ships. The crews were experienced but had not seen the kind of combat the forward fleet had spent the last 2 months living inside. When the warning reached Bryce, he had 41 hours to prepare. He used all 41 of them. The 2 battles happened simultaneously, 60 light-years apart, connected only by the knowledge that each group carried of what the other was doing. At Earth, the Drathan strike fleet arrived expecting to find something small and frightened. What they found was a defense grid that had been rebuilt in 41 hours into something the Imperium had no tactical entry in their database for. Bryce had repositioned every orbital platform, stripped the inner system of civilian traffic, and built a layered response pattern using every lesson the forward fleet had transmitted home during the campaign. The Drathan strike commander hesitated at the outer edge of the system, a single moment of uncertainty, and Bryce used that moment the way a surgeon uses a scalpel. The battle over Earth lasted 9 hours and cost Bryce 17 ships and over 4,000 lives. Earth's orbital rings took hits. 3 surface cities experienced blackouts from power grid disruptions, but the Drathan strike fleet did not reach the planet. By the 6th hour they were pulling back. By the 9th hour they were gone, leaving their dead in Earth's orbit. The people of Earth watched from the ground and did not know the half of what they were watching, and would not fully understand it for years. At the cradle, things were less clean. The station was massive, 2 kilometers across, armored to a degree that suggested the Imperium had never seriously believed anyone would reach it. It had 600 defensive guns and a permanent garrison. Solway had 39 ships left in her task group, and she knew exactly how bad those numbers looked. Haas had been working on his problem for 3 weeks. The cradle's shields used a rotating frequency pattern that standard weapons could not penetrate with sustained fire. By the time you found the right frequency, the shield had already rotated away. Every other navy that had ever tried to crack Drathan's shield technology had approached it as a weapons problem. Haas approached it as a materials problem. He calculated that if a ship accelerated to a specific velocity and then cut its inertial dampeners at a precise moment, the resulting stress on the hull would be unsurvivable for any known species. The crew would be killed by the forces involved before the ship reached the shield. For a human crew with the correct preparation, the threshold was survivable, barely, for 6 seconds. He piloted the test ship himself. He did not ask anyone else to do it. He brought 2 volunteers, briefed them fully, made sure they understood what barely meant, and then flew directly at the cradle's primary shield array at a speed that would have torn apart any Accord vessel in the fleet. The shield tried to rotate. The hull hit the resonant frequency that the rotating pattern passed through for a fraction of a second, and the array cracked. He blacked out, so did both volunteers. The ship's autopilot held course. When Haas came back, his nose was bleeding and 3 of his back teeth had shifted in his jaw. He reported the shield array status to the fleet on the open channel. It said, simply, "It's open." The fleet went in. Solway took a hit in the close quarters fighting aboard the station, a piece of shrapnel across the ribs, deep enough to matter. Her medic told her to sit down. She said she would sit down when the station was secured and not before. The medic, who had served with her for 9 years, noted this in the treatment log as non-compliant and kept working around her. When the fighting reached Vorek's command chamber, it was over. He was standing at his display wall, watching both battles collapse in real time. He turned when Solway entered and looked at her for a long moment, the human admiral, bloodied, breathing carefully, flanked by soldiers. He had expected something different. He was not sure what. Something that looked like what it had done to his fleet. She said, "This ends when you surrender." He said, "And if I do not?" She said, "Then it ends anyway." He thought about his models. He thought about 47 days and 11 disrupted systems. He thought about Earth, which had not broken. He thought about resistance cells on 14 occupied worlds, all of which had activated in the last 6 hours. He thought about a species that had crossed 60 light years for people they had never met and had not stopped moving since they arrived. He surrendered the cradle. The screens went quiet. The war machine, which had run without stopping for over a century, went still. The war did not end the way wars end in stories. There was no single moment, no signing ceremony with clean uniforms and sunlight. The Drathan Imperium, without the cradle and without Vorek's command network, began to fracture along lines that had always been there, supply chains that had been held together by authority rather than loyalty, garrison commanders who had followed orders rather than believed in them, occupied systems that had been waiting 19, 30, 40 years for something to shift. It shifted. The war did not end in a day. It ended in pieces, over months, the way a fire goes out not all at once but ember by ember. Humanity spent those months in the field. Not fighting mostly. There were isolated skirmishes, holdout commanders, pockets of imperial force that did not receive the surrender order or chose not to follow it. But the bulk of the work was the other kind. Human engineers on cracked open supply stations, rebuilding power grids. Human medics on liberated worlds that had not had functioning medical infrastructure in decades. Relief ships moving between systems, carrying food and components and people who knew how to fix things. It was not the work that got written about as much, but it was the work that mattered. On Velshara, Uru stood in the main square of a city that had not been fully lit at night in 19 years. The power was back. The lights were on. She stood there for a long time and did not say anything. Balo, the human navigation officer who had taught her eldest child to read maps, stood beside her and also did not say anything. They had both learned that some moments did not need words to make them real. The cost, when it was finally counted, was not a number that sat easily. Humanity had lost over 500,000 people across the full campaign. Not just the fleet, The ground crews, the engineers, the medics, the relief workers who had gone into systems that were not yet safe because the people there could not wait. The victory parade on Earth was attended by millions, but it was quiet in the way that only crowds that have been through something true can be quiet. Nobody performed joy that day. People felt it when they felt it in private. Vashin attended the memorial service on Earth as the first alien diplomat ever to stand on the planet's surface. He stood at the monument they had built, a simple wall of names, nothing more, and his forehead ran through colors no translation matrix had a clean entry for. He stood there for a long time. Nobody rushed him. The new coalition formed 6 months after the cradle fell. It was broader than the Accord had been: new species, new voices, systems that had been silent for decades because silence had felt safer than involvement. Humanity was invited to take the chair, the leading position in the coalition's governing structure. Solway, who had retired after the campaign with 3 cracked ribs that had healed slightly wrong, and a recurring thing with her left ear from the battle aboard the cradle, turned it down on humanity's behalf. She nominated Vashin. She said the coalition should be led by someone who had fought the longest and lost the most and still believed the effort was worth it. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then Vashin accepted, and his forehead went that amber gold color again, the one with no clean translation. The Drathan officer who had caused the most unexpected conversations was a young commander named Davin, who was Vorek's daughter, and who had defected to the Accord's side in the final weeks of the campaign, bringing with her a full copy of the Imperium's tactical archives. She had done it not for ideology exactly, but because she had watched humanity fight for 5 months and had arrived at a conclusion that she could not fit inside the worldview she had been given. She brought the archives. She also brought questions. She found Akafar at a resettlement camp on a liberated world, doing what he always did, sitting somewhere quiet, talking to people and writing things down. She sat across from him and asked the question she had been carrying since the first battle report reached her. She asked why humanity had come, not politically, not strategically. She understood the official answers. She wanted the real one. Akafar looked out at the camp around them. A Veth child was chasing something small and fast across the open ground. A Lyrathi elder was being helped by a human volunteer to reach a supply station, the elder's 4 arms moving carefully with the volunteer's assistance. Somewhere nearby someone was cooking something, and the smell was the complicated warm kind that means a meal is being made for more people than one. He said he did not know the real answer in a way that could be packaged neatly, but he said he thought it had something to do with the fact that humans had, for most of their history on their own planet, left people to suffer when they could have helped. They knew what that choice looked like from both sides, and at some point enough of them had decided that they did not want to be the civilization that looked the other way. Davin sat with that. Then she said, "The Imperium has spent 100 years studying how civilizations break." She said she had never seen in any of those studies a species that was harder to break than one that had decided, for no practical reason, to care. Akefir wrote that down. The last development came quietly, forwarded to Solway's retirement home in a coastal city on Earth's southern continent. An intelligence summary, routine in format. It noted that 17 civilizations across the galaxy, previously non-communicative with any known coalition, had reached out to the new alliance in the past 3 months. None of them were requesting military assistance. All of them were requesting contact with humanity specifically. The summarized reason, drawn from initial communications, was the same across all 17. They had watched what had happened. They wanted to know more about the species that had done it. Solway read the summary at a table near a window, with her tea going cold at her elbow. She looked out at the sky for a while. Blue and ordinary, the way Earth's sky had always been. The same sky billions of people had stood under for thousands of years, most of them never looking up and wondering what was out there looking back. Something was looking back now, and what it was looking for was them. She picked up her pen and wrote a note to the coalition office. She said humanity would take the meetings. She said to tell the 17 civilizations that they were welcome. She said it simply, the way you say something when you mean it without needing to explain why. Then she finished her tea and watched the sky go dark as the stars came out one by one above her city. And somewhere between all those points of light was a galaxy that had learned, finally, the name of the quiet species in the unremarkable arm that had answered when everyone else had not.